going on, all you wonderful A-plusers out there? It is I, Stuart, here once again to give you guys another video. This time I'm going to be talking about how I would have adapted Kyuranger if I was personally in charge of that season. This has been done by many other YouTubers, I know, but at the same time, this is something that I've been thinking about for quite a long time. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do with this idea. It all kind of started at the very beginning of quarantine, where essentially I started watching Kyuranger to begin with, and as I was watching it, I started to think this could easily have made such an ambitious and really amazing Power Rangers season. So I started jotting down my ideas of how I would have done so. I even wrote full-length scripts for individual episodes of how I would have adapted those ones personally. And originally I thought, you know, how fun would it be to email this to Hasbro just to get that rejection letter that I know would be coming my way? Because I wasn't sure what to do with it. I knew I had this amazing project that I really wanted to share with people. I just wasn't sure how. So I figured, screw it, I'm just gonna make a video and just talk to the internet about how I would have done it. Now, I'm definitely not trying to say that my idea is any better than any of the other YouTubers that have done this as well. In fact, one of my favorites was by one of the writers of the show, Jason Bischoff, who had a whole thing on Let's Talk Toku, where he mentioned that the way he would have done it is he would have called it Power Rangers Nova Force, I believe. I don't remember exactly. And it was a really cool idea. Some of the ideas he brought up, it involved bringing back past characters, which I really liked. This is something I've just come up with for fun because I really enjoy Power Rangers and I love talking about it. So I'm hoping I can share my ideas with you guys, and I'm hoping you guys can give me some feedback. Let me know what you think of it and if you guys would do the same thing as well. Before talking about what the story would be, I want to kind of start with the marketing, how I would have marketed this season. So the big thing to keep in mind is that if this season were to have come out, it would have come out in 2023 and 2024, which means before that season were to come out, we would have had Power Rangers Dino Fury seasons 1 and 2. So that's the main thing to keep in mind. This would be a year before the TV show SPD takes place, right? The other thing is that this would be taking place in New Tech City for the most part, which again is the city that SPD took place in. So already some hints of an SPD tie-in right there. But on top of that, the teaser. Essentially, you would have had a generic teaser using nothing but stock footage of Kyuranger, and then it would fade to black. But then suddenly you would hear something very faintly. Emergency! And then we cut to the red SPD Ranger. We don't know who it is though behind the mask. We just see it's a red SPD Ranger and he's doing a pose and he's saying SPD, and that's it. It could be 3 different people, right? Because we don't know which SPD Ranger might be talking. There's like 3 different people it could be. It's enough to get people intrigued, get the fans like talking about their theories on whether or not this is actually going to be a direct prequel to SPD, what its big tie-ins are going to be with previous seasons. Is this going to be a standalone season, or is it going to be treated like an actual anniversary season? Well, let's get into that. Let's start with what the story for the season would have been. This would be taking place in present time, which of course is 2 or 3 years from now, depending on which season it's in. Basically, another ancient villain has returned from being entrapped for thousands of years. Yes, I know, this is a huge trope that's been going on in Power Rangers for so long. Why are people always trapping their villains and never destroying them? Well, don't worry. I actually do have a pretty good explanation for this one.
There's a simple explanation for that.
This is a villain known as Dark Matter, and he cannot be destroyed because he's literally the embodiment of dark matter. If he were to be destroyed, that would destroy all dark matter in the universe, which would in turn just straight up destroy the entire universe itself. The more planets he takes over, the stronger he gets. The more influence he has throughout the galaxy, the more stronger and unstoppable he suddenly becomes. The only thing standing in his way is the Galactic Resistance, which is led by the Power Rangers Space Squad. The Power Rangers Space Squad, in the very beginning of the show, starts out with only 3 members. We got a Yellow Ranger, a Green Ranger, and a Black Ranger. We don't even have a Red Ranger yet. But of course, if you guys have seen Kyuranger, you know that Rangers get introduced one episode after another for the entire first 12 episodes. And that'll definitely be playing out the exact same way in this adaptation as well. Now, before I talk about the structure of the season overall, I want to start with the characters. Right now, I'm only going to be talking about the first 5 Rangers that we get. I'm not going to be talking about the later Rangers we get until we get to that point when they get introduced in the show. But to start out, we have Lee, who is the Red Ranger. His father was an SPD recruit, not a Power Ranger though, at least not as far as Lee knows. His backstory will be similar to Sky from Power Rangers SPD, but not quite exactly the same. His last memory of his dad will be when he was 5 years old. His dad was dropping him off for his first day of school. Oh, and by the way, Lee's dad's name is going to be Bruce, so it's Bruce Lee, you know, I just think that would be kind of a funny joke to have. I don't know. I thought it was kind of funny. So Bruce drops Lee off at his first day of school and he gives him a good luck charm. But this good luck charm is what is going to be later known in the series as a Morph Star. It is colored red and it's essentially the Q spheres that we get from Kyuranger. His dad gives him that, saying that as long as he holds on to it, he will always be lucky. He will always have good luck coming his way. That same day, after Lee's first day of school, he comes home to find out his dad is no longer around. He went missing during a mission for SPD. Our next character is Joe. Joe we don't really know that much about in the very beginning of the show, and there is a reason for this. We will have a cool reveal with this character later on, but he has hints that he might be a little bit tougher than he looks. He's the smallest out of anyone at SPD Academy, and so therefore no one really thinks much of it when he suddenly comes in last place for every single obstacle course out there. But for now, all we know about him is that he seems to be an introvert. We'll get a little bit more into that part later on. Jeff is the Yellow Ranger and the one that I had the least development for so far. Essentially, he's a goofball and he's a chef. That's kind of all I really have with this character. So let's move on to our Green Ranger, Carol. Essentially, I kind of wrote her to be very similar to Amy Santiago from the show Brooklyn Nine-Nine. However, you can kind of get rid of the police aspect about Amy Santiago's character and just assume that her dad came from a military background instead. But other than that, almost the exact same character. Blake is the Black Ranger of the team, the real tough guy, real short temper. He's really strong. In fact, he is definitely physically the strongest Ranger on the team. But he's also not the most skilled. He spent his whole life relying solely on his muscles to get by. A lot of times people treated him like a bully, and it caused him to act like a bully, even though he does have a good heart. But it also means that he's relied so much on his strength that his skills in battle are actually kind of weak compared to everyone else's. So that is one of his things that he will have to develop over time. Our supporting characters, we have Valerie. She is the youngest of the entire team, and she's also really smart. She's not a ranger per se, but that's mostly because of her age. She's around 13 or 14 years old, whereas all the other rangers are about, somewhere between 17 and 19. We'll keep the fact that they're teenagers, but, they're definitely adult teenagers, essentially. Then we got Commander Ryu. Commander Ryu, or as I was originally going to call him, Commander Truman. Okay, I got a little explaining to do on this one. When I started writing this script, I had the idea of, hey, what if we got a different version of Commander Truman? A version of Commander Truman that was always from the Prime Power Rangers universe, the Prime Dimension, whatever you want to call it. I don't think there's an official name for it, but essentially the one that a majority of the Power Ranger seasons take place in. It would have been interesting, to my opinion, to have a version of Truman slightly different from his RPM counterpart, but one that takes place in the main universe. The only reason I didn't commit to that idea when writing this is because I feel like that aspect would be very confusing for Power Ranger fans, because even though the multiverse has existed in Power Rangers for the longest time, the idea of a doppelganger hasn't really been introduced in the show. It's been introduced in the comic books many times, but the idea of multiple Jasons, for example, existing in multiple universes, a Red Ranger Jason from the main universe and maybe a Red Ranger Jason in the Dino Charge universe, that hasn't been touched upon yet. So that's the one thing that had me leaving out the idea of a Prime Universe version of Commander Truman. However, all that said, I basically wrote Commander Ryu to be almost the exact same character as Commander Truman. So in fact, when I was writing it, I had the idea in mind of James Galen playing him. So regardless of whether or not it ends up being Commander Truman, I do think, like, when when writing this, I did always have that in mind of James being the commander of the series and basically playing his role the exact same way he played it in Power Rangers RPM, except for this time, rather than leading the actual military, he is now leading the Power Rangers themselves. Let's talk about our villains now. So our main villain, like I said before, is Dark Matter, and he cannot be destroyed. The more planets he takes over, the stronger he becomes, and the more unstoppable he is. His generals include Ares, who is very similarly to Dark Matter, very no-nonsense, straight to the point kind of a general. Whereas the other two, Voltron and Kyuranger Bot, which would be using the costumes of the Black Ranger and of the Pink Ranger when they're unmorphed, but they would be the villains of the show essentially, and they'd be there for mostly comedic relief. Voltron would be big, tough, and dumb. He would be essentially kind of Blake's rivalry in a lot of ways. And then Kyuranger Bot, I literally wrote to be a Karen if a Karen was a robot, but I kept the evil aspect of a Karen, but I was just a lot more literal about it, essentially. So now that we got our main characters out of the way, it's time to talk about the structure of the season. And you'll notice as I go episode by episode, some episodes I have a lot of detail with, other episodes not so much. Alright, so let's start with episode 1. Episode 1 starts on a very dark note. The Rangers have just lost another battle because they are just constantly surrounded by Matterbots. There's only 3 Rangers to really fight them off. We have a Black Ranger, a Green Ranger, and a Yellow Ranger. These are the most powerful Rangers that we've gotten in the history of Power Rangers so far. They use what is known as the Morph Stars. The Morph Stars are essentially the Q-Spheres from Kyuranger. The Q-Spheres have been spread throughout the entire galaxy, and both the Rangers and Dark Matter are looking for all 7 of them. In other words, you can kind of think of this as the Black Star Dragon Ball arc from Dragon Ball GT. After another really bad loss, it's time for Commander Ryu to come clean about something. He tells the Rangers that there is another Morph Star on the planet known as Earth. The reason he hasn't brought this up before is because even though aliens exist on Earth, they're not quite known to the entire galaxy yet. They're just known as that one planet that some aliens go to now and then to either take over or just go on vacation. It's not really a very common place in the galaxy quite yet, so therefore it is off Dark Matter's radar for the time being. That is why when he announces that there's a blue Morph Star, he says he wants the Rangers to go into SPD, grab it from the people there that he has connections with, and leave. He doesn't want them spending any more time on Earth than they have to. We then cut to planet Earth, specifically New Tech City in SPD Academy, where we see that Lee and Joe are currently SPD recruits. They haven't quite made the rank of SPD officers yet, but they're working on it. They are currently 2 more tests away from becoming official SPD members. First of all, they have their physical exam, which is going on this current night. And then the next day, they got their written exam. So during the final obstacle course that they have to complete for their physical exam, a bully kind of comes up to Lee as they're in the middle of running it. This bully tries to trip Lee so he can be the one to finish this obstacle first, but Lee is super skilled, jumps over the guy's kick, which causes the bully himself to fall over as Lee is about to finish first in the obstacle. Lee stops right before crossing the line, looks back, and sees all the other SPD recruits just running past him, not bothering to help him up as the guy struggles to get up. Lee, of course, having a big heart, decides to go back and help the guy out. Joe runs into them at the exact same time this happens, and Joe himself tries to help the dude up as well. They then slowly try to make their way to the obstacle. Joe notices that the dude has a slight cut on his knee, and even though it's really tiny, because of course this is a kid's show and we can't show that much blood, it's enough to make Joe just a little squeamish, seemingly anyways. Joe looks away, Lee goes, "What's wrong?" And Joe just says, "I don't do well around blood." That's all we really get. We're going to come back to this note later on though, don't worry. The 3 of them cross the finish line with only a second to spare. That night in the dorms, Lee and Joe are getting ready for some R&R when they are visited by none other than Lieutenant Stone, who is now an SPD official officer. Now, that's how I wrote it in the script. Obviously, if this were to go into production, I don't even know if the actor who played Lieutenant Stone still acts anymore. But if he was willing to come back, that would have been really cool to have him back as an SPD officer in order to give that character a little bit more closure or something like that. But either way, he is there to let them know that technically they failed their last obstacle course, and letting them know that they are on thin ice. Now, the reason he says that they technically failed is because the timer for that last obstacle was on a second delay, which means that if it wasn't for a malfunction on their part, they would have been too late when completing the last obstacle course. He tells them that they're on thin ice and that they better do really good on their written exam tomorrow morning. Lee is cocky about the whole thing, believing he has this in the bag. Joe is a lot more nervous about it, despite the fact that I think Joe has a lot more book smarts than Lee. The two of them are getting ready for bed, and Lee takes out what looks to be a red morph star, which he puts right next to his alarm clock. Joe asks him what that thing even is, and Lee just tells him, oh, it's my dad's good luck charm. He gave it to me the last day I saw him. And then that's all we kind of get from it. And then we cut back to the Rangers, who have suddenly arrived on Earth. The Rangers' morph stars start to glow, and then that indicates that there is a morph star on this planet. We then cut back to Lee sleeping in his dorm with his morph star next to his alarm. His morph star starts to glow, which causes his alarm to short circuit. The next day, both Lee and Joe oversleep and they miss their final exam because of this. The two of them are then kicked out of SPD, but they are told that they can come back after the summer if they want to try again. The Rangers go to Earth and try to get the blue morph star from SPD Academy, but by the time they get there, dark matter has already arrived and the matter bots have already taken the blue morph star. As they're taking over SPD and destroying property there and essentially just making a big mess, Joe and Lee both hear about this and they march right into action, trying to help out the other SPD officers and the Power Rangers as well. These new Rangers that they've never seen before, the Power Rangers Space Squad. They see the three of them morph using the morph stars, and Lee notices how similar it looks to the one that his dad gave him years ago. Lee decides, I wonder if this thing works, and tries it out. He morphs into the Red Ranger by, doing the exact same motion that the other Rangers were doing. Lee has become the new Red Ranger now for the Power Ranger Space Squad. He joins their fight in defeating all the Matter bots, and suddenly the blue morph star is on the ground because they destroy a Matterbot that was holding the blue morph star in his hand, and now it is on the ground where Joe finds it. Joe picks it up with no intention of using it, but then we get our villain of the week, or I guess villain of the next couple of weeks, because this villain was featured in a few episodes of Kyuranger and then never featured again. I actually completely forgot about this villain's name, but essentially he comes down and he is just wiping the floor with the Rangers. Joe is very hesitant, but he realizes that they might need an extra hand, so Joe holds it out and he morphs into the Blue Ranger, but his morph is a lot different from the others. For some reason, before morphing, whereas the other Rangers just tend to turn into the Ranger color that they are, for him, he grows a lot of fur on himself before finally turning into not only a Blue Ranger, but a weird mixture of a Power Ranger and a wolf at the same time. He fights like an animal. He has beast-like instincts. He's almost not even the same person. He's aggressive. He's barely even an introvert anymore. He's just tearing these villains apart. And eventually they don't stop the villain of the week, but they do buy themselves a lot of time in order for the villains to have to retreat. The main villain gets into a ship, and of course his ship forms the giant monster, which settles on the moon. The other Rangers then decide to use their Megazord, and they fight this creature on the moon and defeat him. The end, right? Well, not quite. We then have a scene where the Rangers are all on the ship, and they take a vote on whether or not they think Joe and Lee are really Ranger material. Eventually, it becomes unanimous, and all the Rangers agree to allow them to join the ship. With all this going on, I can see this episode kind of working as a two-parter more than a one-part, opening episode, because there is kind of a lot that I have here. But there is one last thing that I want to bring up in this episode, and that is with Commander Ryu. After Lee and Joe do join the team, Commander Ryu takes a moment in his office and sits down and sees a picture. This picture is of Lee and his father Bruce, and Ryu just kind of mumbles to himself, "You'd be proud of him, Bruce. You'd be proud." And then the episode ends there. Episode 2 is where we would get introduced to two of my favorite characters from Kyuranger, Balance and Naga in Kyuranger. But here I'd be changing the character's name to Brock and Balance, essentially. I'd keep the name Balance because he does have that whole thing with the weight for the earrings, which I still find really weird. I'd keep him as a robot, full of different emotions. But Brock, I would keep him exactly the same how he is in Kyuranger. In other words, I wouldn't change a single thing about their characters from Kyurangers, except for with Naga, I definitely would change his name to Brock. The reason being is so it could kind of be a play on the word Spock, because, you know, the idea is that he would be a human with no emotions, or not a human per se, but he'd be an alien that comes from a race of other aliens with zero emotion, and Balance is almost the exact opposite. He is a robot who has been programmed to be full of so much emotion. The two of them are very famous thieves throughout the galaxy, so of course the Rangers don't really trust them at first, and they're right to not trust them. While Brock is definitely trying to be friendly with the Rangers, Balance has his own ideas. He wants to stay being a petty thief, even though Brock is kind of just going along with Balance only because Balance is really the only friend that Brock has ever known. But then in the episode, as Lee refers to Brock as his friend, this has Brock questioning what they've been doing with their lives, and eventually leads to them helping the Rangers find both the Silver and the Gold Morph Star, and they eventually morph into the Silver and Gold Ranger, becoming part of the team. What I would use Brock for mostly is kind of a metaphor for kids that kind of grow up either with autism or just introverts in general who just feel so out of place in the world. His ideology of the world is that it's a giant theater act. It's a giant play that everyone is a part of and everyone has a script for except for him. And we'd have many episodes where it'd be him trying to fit in with the rest of the Rangers, but then making a fool of himself. There was an episode of Star Trek Next Generation. Sorry, it wasn't an episode. It was a movie. It was Star Trek Generations, where essentially Worf was on a plank and someone accidentally recalls the plank, causing Worf to fall into the ocean and be soaking wet. Everyone starts laughing. Data is wondering what everyone finds so funny about this. Worf just fell into an ocean of cold water, and yet everyone's laughing at his misery. And you have his friend trying to explain to him it's just a moment of just hilarity. Sometimes it's okay to laugh at other people's misery if it's not going too far. And Data replies by pushing one of the other crew members into the ocean. And everyone looks at him and tells him, "That's not funny." I love that. I love that writing, and that is what I would be doing with Brock. Brock would be the kind of person that would try to fit in, but in doing so would be constantly making a bigger fool of himself. But you would have Lee there and Balance as his way of trying to learn human nature, essentially, or learn his social skills over time. So even though in the beginning he'd be super out of place and would feel super awkward around everyone, over time he'd grow to be like most of the other people on the team, but without like fully changing. He would definitely be different from everyone at the very end of the show, but his arc would be that he would no longer feel out of place. He could be different, but embrace what makes him different, but without feeling left out. That's what I'd be doing with Brock's character. With Balance, I don't really see much of an arc with his character other than the idea of him learning to care about other people other than himself. That would pretty much be Balance's arc throughout the season. Episode 3, we would introduce the Orange Ranger, and he'd be evil, and that's kind of all I really got with that. I'd probably have Carol leading the mission and it going completely wrong, and so her having a backup plan, but even that backup plan not being enough, and so then we see Lee having to react within, both plans failing, and this would be the first hint that Lee does have what it takes to be a leader on the field. Episode 4 would be Blake and Balance being called away for a different mission, so the Rangers are a little bit short-staffed. At first, things seem to go okay even without having a full team, but then the Rangers are overpowered and Commander Ryu has no choice but to entrust Valerie as the new Pink Ranger. He reveals that he's had the Pink Morph Star for the longest time and he's wanted to give it to Valerie, but he needed to wait till he knew that Valerie was ready. But at this point, he does start to trust her a little more, not fully, mind you. Like if it was different circumstances, he definitely would have kept it for himself, but in this particular case, he has no other choice, but he gives it to Valerie. One thing I forgot to mention about her character is that while she is a tech nerd, she's also kind of a goth character. She loves wearing all black, but of course, the funny thing is that she hates the color pink and she becomes the Pink Ranger. So just kind of a funny gag, I thought. I don't know if that's ever been done in Power Rangers, not that I can think of. I can't really think of a season where you've had someone be the color that they actually don't like. The closest thing I can think of is Sky But it wasn't that he hated blue per se, he just wanted to be red so much more. Episode 5 is when we get a little bit more information about the Orange Ranger. The Orange Ranger turns out to be under Dark Matter's control, but the Rangers do eventually free him. This is when Carol and Lee kind of realize their strengths and weaknesses together. Carol is really great at strategies when it comes to before the battle. She's good at having a plan, a backup plan, and a backup plan for her backup plans. She's not good at thinking on the spot though. So if one of her backup plans for her backup plans falls flat, the team is screwed. She doesn't know how to react to situations as they continually evolve on the spot. But Lee does. Lee isn't the best at planning ahead of time, but he is amazing at planning his actions on the spot whenever he needs to improvise. That is his biggest strength as a leader. And that is when Lee and Carol kind of have this agreement. The two of them are sharing leadership, essentially. Carol is the one strategizing before every battle, but Lee is the one leading the actual battle itself. Eventually, they not only get rid of his mind control, but then they discover that the Orange Ranger barely remembers anything about himself. He remembers that he was a younger brother and that his older brother constantly took care of him. But unfortunately, his last memory is of him betraying his older brother to Dark Matter. And he doesn't know what happened to his brother. For all he knows, his brother is destroyed. The very next episode, episode 6, the Rangers capture Ares, and Dark Matter is forced to entrust a couple of bounty hunters to now lead the charge. You get a little joke where it's Voltron and K-Renbot trying to lead themselves, but of course it does not work out really well, so we then get introduced to 2 new bounty hunters. The very next episode, Ryu reveals that he knows these bounty hunters, but he doesn't reveal what it is that he knows about them. The Rangers attempt to take down these 2 bounty hunters, but they get their butts kicked. Commander Ryu then realizes he has no choice. He reaches into a box that was locked away and pulls out a purple Morph Star. Ares, being in prison at this time, sees the purple Morph Star and wonders how Ryu got a hold of it. He then tries to transform into the Purple Ranger, but it's unstable and it nearly kills him. Back at the ship, the Rangers all have to retreat. We then lead into episode 8. Ares reveals that he was one of the creators of the Morph Stars. The Rangers don't believe this, but Ares reveals that he was once a Greek god. He was the god of war. He, along with the other Greek gods, were the ones who forged the Morph Stars. They spread them out through the galaxy because they figured no one team should be able to have that much power, especially because just one Morph Star alone has the power of almost an entire Power Rangers team by itself. But then he also reveals that he never made a purple Morph Star. This is when we finally get a little more backstory on Ryu and his connection to Lee's dad. It turns out the two of them actually used to work for SPD. At the time, they were collaborating with the Silver Guardians and Lightspeed Rescue with being able to reuse old Ranger tech. They used the blue Morph Star to try to create their own version of it, a version that was essentially a purple Morph Star. But this ended up being very unstable and they could never fully get it to work. As a plea bargain, Ares says that he can fix this Morph Star so it'll work perfectly, but in return, he wants to be let free. The team doesn't agree to this at first, but Ares guarantees them that if he leaves, Dark Matter is going to assume that he gave them personal information about their fleet, and therefore Dark Matter is going to be after Ares himself. So Ares says that if you let me go, you won't ever hear from me again. Dark Matter will never hear from me again. I'm going to go off into the farthest, deepest space of the galaxy, and no one will ever hear from me. So the Rangers eventually, with no other options, do agree, and he stabilizes the purple Morpher, making Ryu essentially a purple Ranger who looks kind of similar to a wizard. And they destroy one of the 2 bounty hunters, but not both of them. The other one flies off and retreats. We then get one last reveal that these 2 bounty hunters were responsible for the disappearance of Lee's father. We don't really get much more information other than that. Alright, so this part of the video, I actually don't have that much detail in any episodes after this. This is where I stopped writing the episode scripts individually and just kind of wrote out the rest of the season of what I do. So this last part of the video is actually going to be very vague. So essentially, the Blue Ranger does get revealed later on to be a werewolf. The way I thought it'd be kind of funny to reveal this is to have Joe essentially be a vegetarian the entire time, but one day when Lee goes to get sandwiches for everyone, he accidentally forgets this and gets Joe a roast beef sandwich that is actually cooked very rare, so Joe has a slight taste of blood as he's eating the sandwich, and then it starts getting him to crave more, and then he's revealed to be a werewolf the whole time. So the episode would be kind of a more comedic episode of the Rangers trying to get him to calm down and not be a werewolf and to go back into Joe. This is also where it'd be revealed that essentially the blue morph star helps him control the beast within him. Essentially, it gives him all the strength that he has as a werewolf, but he would essentially be able to have more control of it. I would also use the same costume that they use from Kyuranger for the Blue Ranger when he's not morphed, essentially. One of the other twists I had in mind is between the Orange Ranger and his brother. I would have it be that for the longest time, the Orange Ranger believes that he was the one who betrayed his brother, when in fact it turned out the Orange Ranger was the older brother, and his younger brother was the one that betrayed him because of how many times the older brother had protected the younger brother. The younger brother felt inferior to him for the longest time, and that's why he eventually teamed up with Dark Matter and helped him take full control of his older brother, who at the time was the Orange Ranger. I then have an idea for another character who would join the team and become the Aqua Blue Ranger. I have her written as Bright Matter, the essentially complete opposite of Dark Matter. Essentially, the way their power balance kind of works is as one grows stronger, the other one grows weaker. Neither one of them can be destroyed, because if one's destroyed, they're both destroyed. The easiest way to compare these two characters, I'd say think of Klaatu and Rava from Legend of Korra. Then we get to our first crossover episode. Yes, I said first, because this would not be the anniversary episode. This would just be a team-up episode. And actually, crossover is the wrong word, because this technically wouldn't even be with an established team. I'll explain. So the way this episode would turn out is that they're going after one of the bounty hunters, the one that's still alive from the previous episode that is responsible for the disappearance of Lee's father. They follow her ship into a wormhole, and then as they get out of this wormhole, they discover the SPD Red Ranger along with Jakku, who's there as well. Their assumption is that they have somehow teleported into the future, but then the Red SPD Ranger takes off his helmet, revealing him to be Lee. Yeah, that's right. They see an alternate version of Lee, but as a Red SPD Ranger. Turns out that they didn't time travel, they in fact just went into a completely different dimension. And here it's revealed that Dark Matter is so powerful, he doesn't just control the Prime Power Rangers universe. He exists in this alternate new timeline that we've never seen before. He also exists within the Dino Charge universe. He also exists within the RPM universe as well. It turns out that his influence is throughout the entire multiverse. And so therefore the stakes are now raised higher than they've ever been before in all of Power Rangers. Eventually, the team is about to leave, but Lee ends up walking into SPD headquarters where, and I mean Earth Prime Lee. I'm just going to be referring to, the main Power Rangers universe as Earth Prime. I know that's DC, but I don't care. Lee ends up exploring SPD right before the team's about to leave, and then he discovers the commander of SPD. And no, I don't mean Commander Kruger. I mean his dad, Bruce. Yes, he's in an alternate timeline where Bruce never died, and we have a really heart-to-heart moment between the two of them. Bruce, of course, had a little bit of a falling out with the SPD version of Lee, but nothing serious, just like a little bit of a discourse between the two of them. And so Lee is about to apologize, but his dad says, "No, you don't need to do that. You're a grown man and you have every right to make your own decision." And then that's when his dad says, "Well, I'd like to take some credit for the man you've turned out to be. The truth is you were just a great person from the start. I feel like, even if you didn't have me, you'd still turn out to be a wonderful human being." We'd have a moment where Lee is trying so hard not to tear up, but he salutes his dad, and then the team heads out back into their own dimension. The way we would end this season would be a reveal that Bright Matter can locate the warrior who originally sealed up dark matter. Yes, it turns out the warrior who sealed up dark matter was never actually destroyed, but he was trapped in the same prison dimension that they trapped dark matter into. The Rangers travel to this dimension, and that's when they find another Red Ranger, but a Red Ranger who has the sword and the shield. Essentially the darker Red Ranger from Kyuranger. I can't remember what his name was, but essentially he's the character that they finally track down, and they free him from the prison dimension, revealing him to be Bruce. That is right. We get the full backstory on what it was that happened to Lee's father, the prime Earth of Lee's father. Essentially, while fighting the two bounty hunters, turns out the bounty hunters were going after a time machine device. Probably have it be a chronomorpher because if you remember, like what I was mentioning earlier, I had the idea that SPD is collabing with the Silver Guardians and Lightspeed Rescue, so the idea of them having a chronomorpher doesn't seem like it'd be that, out of place. I mean, we see something kind of similar in Beast Morphers. We see that they also have old Ranger tech. So it's not too far-fetched, to my opinion, to say that SPD would also have that same type of Ranger tech. Turns out they're stealing a chronomorpher, and while Lee's dad is trying to stop them, he is accidentally sent back in time, many, many, many years into the past. And that is when he is introduced to Bright Matter. Bright Matter builds him his own Morph Star, one that he uses to transform into the most powerful known Ranger in the Power Rangers universe. The Phoenix Ranger is what they call him. But he's really just the darker Red Ranger. He ends up teaming up with Ares to actually seal dark matter once and for all. The team are surprised by this. Wait, he teamed up with Ares? Isn't Ares the bad guy? And this is when we get a little bit more backstory on Ares. It turned out that Ares wasn't always the bad guy. Yes, he was always the god of war, but he's always fought for the side against dark matter. He's always fought alongside Bright Matter and the Phoenix Ranger. But then, after an eternity of life, he's been around since the beginning of time, just like Bright Matter. He just got tired of the wars. He got tired of the battles. So he eventually decided to change sides, figuring, hey, maybe if I team up with dark matter this time, maybe the war will have a completely different outcome. But as we kind of see, this leads to him being in self-isolation. We'll come back to this when we talk about future episodes. But the season would essentially end with them freeing the Phoenix Ranger, and then we lead into our season finale, which would be the big anniversary episode. And I will talk about that in the next video, which I will come up with next week. But I will give you a little bit of a hint. The anniversary crossover would be 3 episodes, and the name of the crossover would be Hexagon. That's what I'm going to leave you on. But guys, that is my pitch for Power Rangers Space Squad, the Kyuranger Adaptation. Wow, this video was exhausting to do. I literally did a bunch of different takes because I realized that I had left things out here and there, and my notes that I've taken for this video are so vague that I really want to go back in time and slap myself for not giving myself more detailed notes. But yeah, this is essentially my pitch, but like I said, I will definitely come back next week to tell you my idea of how I would have done the anniversary for that season using those characters. But this was a lot of fun, and I hope to do this with other shows in general. I already have an idea of how I do Kamen Rider X8 if I was adapting that series, so I might actually have that be the video I do after next week's crossover video. So whew, I'm exhausted. Let me know what you guys thought about this whole thing. Tell me if you guys would change anything, if you like my ideas, if you hate them. I want to know about it. But guys, above all, definitely hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, but don't forget to keep it A+.